Hello investigators and welcome to Until the End of Time. My name is Veronica. Thank you so much for tuning in. In this video I'm going to be talking about the new customizable keyword. Now you might be thinking if you watched the last video, wait, weren't you going to do a video about Carson next? And that is correct, that was my intention, but as of last night Maxine dumped the keyword onto her Twitter. That's a very nasty way of saying that. Maxine was delightful enough to share the keyword rules with us on Twitter last night. And I figured I would just put the rules for customizable and talk about Carson in the same video. But as I was making this video about customizable cards, it got longer and longer and longer. And I realized there was no way I was going to be able to do both justice in the same video. And I made the call to just do customizable right now. If you're excited about Carson, don't worry, he's still coming. I think I have quite a few things to say about him. I have put a lot of thought into how I would build him and what I think would be interesting with him. So that is still happening and it's hopefully happening soon, but I felt this was a little bit more important so that we can talk about the cards that we're excited about right now. Now, before I go any further, you will have already heard this if you watched my last video. So you can go ahead and skip ahead if you want to, but I'm not going to be talking about leaks on this channel going forward. And I just quickly want to remind people, the reason that I'm doing this is FFG is really pushing content creator previews now. And they really want that to be a thing. They want spoiler season or preview season to be a real thing. And if stuff gets leaked, that just takes all the fun out of it. I can also say, because I did mention this on both Twitter and on the Discord, that I have received a card to preview. Not yet. It's happening at some point in the future. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say when, but I have been told I have to wait a little bit. Don't worry, it's coming. So yeah, it might be a little selfish, but I'd like not to have leaks happen here. Thank you very much for listening to that. And now let's get talking about the reason we're here, which is the customizable keyword. So customizable is a new keyword in the Scarlet Keys expansion that comes with these paired upgrade sheets. If you've seen my Amina video, you've already seen two of them, but let's look at a new one, the Hunter's Armor. This was in the article for FFG for this expansion. And as you can see, there is what looks like a normal Guardian card on the left, but as you can tell, there has no level indicator. It's a blue bar instead. That is not the same as no level indicator as we've seen before. It's a special one that fits the customizable thing because the level is adjustable. We'll get into that in a second. And it comes with this paired list of all the various upgrades. So thanks to Maxine, we now know how these upgrades work. So let's take a look how that exactly goes about. As we already kind of expected, each checkbox represents a single point of XP. You're only allowed to spend this XP between scenarios, so you're not just allowed to upgrade while you're in the middle of a game, because that would get a little silly. And once you've checked every box for a specific upgrade, every copy of the card in your deck gets that upgrade. So let's say that I upgrade the Hex Drinker upgrade for Hunter's Armor. All the copies of Hunter's Armor in my deck are going to have that upgrade, but the same is not true for your Hunter's Armor if we're playing in the game and we're both using this card. So keep that in mind, it's only for your copies. The customizable card's level is equal to half the total number of checkboxes marked on the upgrade sheet rounded up. So if I have, say, 3 different upgrades that each cost a couple points XP, totaling up to 6 XP, then, to 6 XP, that would make it a level 3 card. If I then add 2 more boxes, that makes it a level 4 card. You have to have the proper class access in order to buy these customizable cards with the specific upgrades. It's worth noting that It's worth noting that you can buy these cards with some of the upgrades already applied. So, for example, if you are Ursula Downs and you are allowed to bring relic cards from any class, but not Guardian cards, you can buy Hunter's Armor with the upgrade that gives it the relic trait, and that immediately allows it by your deck building. It's also worth noting that spending experience points on an upgrade for a customizable card that's already in your deck counts as upgrading cards for the purposes of card effects. As far as I'm aware, there's only 2 cards right now that care about that, and they're both Mystic Permanents. Down the Rabbit Hole and Arcane Research both reduce the cost to upgrade cards, which potentially makes these cards very powerful if you have Mystic customizable cards, or if you have Mystic access and customizable cards in a different class access to reduce the cost of these upgrades, which seems quite powerful. A lot of these cards can get very crazy if you put a lot of XP into them, and this is a great way to reduce the cost. Small further clarifications. The upgrades for the customizable are considered present at all times, even if they're out of play. This is just a minor thing, but basically, while your card's in the discard pile, it's still going to have those traits, it's still going to have the cost reduction and whatever. And spending experience points is permanent for that campaign and cannot be refunded. Once you've committed to upgrading something, there's no going back down. Okay, that's a lot of rules. I think one of the easier ways to explain this is to take one of these cards and just kind of go through it and go through the thought process and see how this plays out. So we have the Hunter's Armor. It is a 4-cost asset with a willpower icon, item and armor traded. The only rule stacks there is customizable. It has 2 health, 2 sanity, and takes up the body slot. So for 0 XP, you're allowed to include this card in your deck. That's it. And that's all it does. But you can start spending XP between scenarios to start upgrading with the associated upgrade list. So starting out at the top, if we add the Enchanted upgrade to the Hunter's Armor, it now gains the Relic trait and takes up an Arcane slot instead of a body slot. Now this is not normally something that I think you would get super excited about, but if you're a Guardian, maybe you have something else you want in your body slot. Like a bandolier, or maybe you're planning to upgrade it to a flamethrower, but by the time you get there, you realize, oh, I can't have my armor and my flamethrower. So you can just spend the 1 XP to give all the copies in your deck this upgrade. And I think that's a kind of elegant way that Customizable makes some of these things work, where you can have this card that you can put XP into, and you're like, oh, I need to make this minor adjustment to make this card fit my deck better. They can do that without having to print a whole new card, right? They don't need to print a Enchanted Hunter's Armor card that takes up the Arcane slot instead of the body slot, and then an Enchanted Hunter's Armor with the additional upgrades that it gets more health or more sanity. They just have the one card, and you can get all these different variations for whatever version you want for your deck, your campaign, your group. And I really like how this keyword lets that happen. Next up, we have Protective Runes. This lets the Hunter's Armor be assigned damage and horror dealt to other investigators at your location. Now this is a Guardian ability that we've seen many times before. Cards like True Grit and Something Worth Fighting For, this is all they do. And this is usually on expensive Guardian assets, and this is no different. It is actually a quite powerful ability. My experience with Brother Xavier and Tetsuo Mori, the ability to have damage and horror from people who are quite squishy go onto one of the Guardian cards, and then they don't have to worry about it, is actually quite useful. And as we'll see a little bit later, might even combo with some of the further upgrades in this list. Next up, we got 2 very simple upgrades. The Durable upgrade for 2 XP and the Hallowed upgrade for 2 XP. Just increase, or well, double in this case, the health and sanity respectively. That being said, it's worth pointing out that Bulletproof Vest, which is actually a reasonable card, is a 2-cost 3 XP asset, where all it does is give you 4 health soak. It doesn't even give you any sanity. And so Hunter's Armor is actually, I think, priced quite competitively if that's what you're going for. If you just need a bunch of soak, spending 4 XP to get 2 copies of this card, don't forget that the upgrades apply to all the copies in your deck, to have these 4/4 stat bombs, basically, that you can just keep in your body slot, soak as much as you need to, and then have it die, play the other one, and as long as your economy can keep up, you're just golden. You don't need anything else. Speaking of economy, the next upgrade is the Lightweight upgrade. It reduces the cost by 1, and makes it so that playing it doesn't provoke a stack of opportunity. Initially, I wasn't too convinced on that second part of the ability. Not provoking the opportunity is fine, it's a bit niche, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked it as kind of an additional economy ability in a roundabout way, where it allows you to avoid playing this card until you're sure you need it. Imagine the following situation. You're playing Roland Banks, who only has 5 sanity, but he has a lot of health. So you might have gotten the Hallowed upgrade, the one we just talked about that gives it +2 sanity as well. And you're doing fine You're just playing along, you're no problems. But you're engaged with this enemy, and then in Mythos phase you draw Rotting Remains and you draw an Autofill, and you suddenly take 3 horror. You're doomed, right? You have 1 sanity left, 2 sanity left. And now you have this soak card in your hand that you can't play because you're engaged with an enemy, and if you play it, you're going to take another hit that's even closer to that being defeated by horror, and you want to avoid that. So normally you'd be kind of forced to play your Hunter's Armor as soon as you draw it, because you can't use it to soak horror after you've already taken the horror. But with the Lightweight upgrade, you can feel a little bit safer with not playing it just yet, until you know, okay, I'm getting low on my sanity, I need to play this now. Even if there's an enemy, I can just play this and I'll be safe. I'll be safe for at least a couple more turns. And I really like that as a sort of small upgrade that they've added onto this otherwise pretty useful upgrade of just reducing the cost by 1. Also, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sister Mary. She has the inverse health and sanity from Roland, so there's a reason for her to care about this card as well, right? Getting lots of health soak for her can keep her alive a lot longer. Next on, we have the Hex Drinker upgrade, which I think is the upgrade on the list that I'm most excited about. So it reads, after 1 or more damage or horror is assigned to Hunter's Armor from a treachery effect, you may exhaust it to draw a card. Guardians taking care of treacheries from everybody else is a theme that I really want to see more explored. We've seen it on cards like Let Me Handle This or First Watch. And I think it is great to let Guardians draw more cards. Card draw it's not necessarily something that Guardians can do, but it's not something they're good at. And anytime they get a repeatable source of card draw, that's just worth noting because it's something that they're normally so bad at, so they have so much difficulty with. And in fact, it combos with one of the other upgrades. If you have the Protective Runes upgrade, you can have damage or horror dealt to other investigators by treacheries assigned to the Hunter's Armor, at which point you get to draw a card. So this could even be for 5 XP, 2 copies in your deck, to every time somebody at your location takes a damage or horror from a treachery, you can put it on the armor, exhaust it, and draw a card. This seems like a really fun playstyle, and I actually really want to build this deck now. And we have one more upgrade, which is the Armor of Thorns upgrade. After 1 or more damage or horror is assigned to Hunter's Armor from an enemy attack, you may exhaust it to deal 1 damage to that enemy. This is an effect we've seen out of Guardian before, Guard Dog, and Survival Knife. And it's actually something that I'm slightly less excited for just for that reason. It's something we've seen before. It's not bad, certainly. And if you're going into this playstyle, I think you'll still be happy to play this card. But I don't know, I'm more excited about the ability to draw a bunch of cards for tanking all these treacheries. And also, the other reason I'm less excited about it is, of course, that this playstyle has found a home in Daniela. And Daniela can't take XP Guardian cards, so Daniela cannot take the Armor of Thorns upgrade on the Hunter Armor, or any other armor upgrade for that matter. So that's a touch disappointing. Still, I'm super excited for the Hunter's Armor, and I think it's one of the simpler customizable cards. So I'm I'm excited and a little nervous at the same time for all the exciting other cards, because there's a lot of words on these cards, and they do a lot of different effects, and figuring out how they fit in your deck is going to be tricky. And speaking of cards that have a lot of words on them, let's talk about the Runic Axe. So this is a, customizable Guardian card, the other one that we've seen so far. 4 cost again, combat icon. It is unique, worth noting. You can only have 1 of these in play at a time. It has the item, weapon, and melee traits. It's 2-handed. And here we go. It uses 4 charges and replenishes 1 of these charges at the start of every round. And it has an action to fight. You get +1 combat for this attack. Before this attack, you may spend any number of charges to imbue the axe with that many different inscriptions. Accuracy, you get additional +2 combat for this attack. Or power, this attack deals +1 damage. So just at its base value, this card, you can fight once per round basically for free. Any longer than that, you're going to start losing charges. But if you're ever spending a round not fighting, those charges are going to start refilling. So you're kind of in this ebb and flow where if you're swamped by enemies, you might have to spend multiple charges in a round, and then hopefully you can go around without having to fight with the axe in order to replenish a couple of them. Accuracy makes you attack at a +3 combat, which is actually a pretty hefty buff, but you're only attacking for 1 damage unless you also use the power inscription. And then, of course, there are a huge number of possible upgrades. In fact, there are 8. I believe, again, totaling up to 15, unless again, totaling up to 15. Keep in mind, you can only spend 10 XP at the most for this, because it maxes out at level 5. So you won't be able to get every one of these upgrades onto a single card. So starting up the Heirloom upgrade reduces the cost of the Runic Axe by 1, and it gives it the Relic trait. I think this puts it in line with cards like the Enchanted Blade. The Enchanted Blade has 3 charges and does +1 damage, +2 combat attacks 3 times. It doesn't recharge itself, so the Runic Axe is better over the long run, but the Enchanted Blade is much better if you have to fight multiple times in close succession. The Relic trait is also one of the more relevant traits as far as encounter cards go. There are a couple of enemies that care about being defeated by relics. One of the kind of neat little bit of design that I didn't initially think about is that gating this behind a 1 XP cost means that it's a little bit of a fortification against clauses getting too smeared together and too much color pie breaking. One of the things that people complained about with the Enchanted Blade, in fact, is that it was too easy now for non-guardians to get a very functional level 0 weapon for, someone like Jim Culver or Agnes. And some people felt like it was getting a little bit too easy for just about anybody, someone like Skiz O'Toole, to get all these weapons that they maybe weren't supposed to get because they only got level 0 Guardian or level 0 Mystic, and that let them get this very potent weapon. The Runic Axe is a little bit overcosted, I think, initially, but anybody who can take 1 XP Guardian cards can get the Heirloom upgrade on there, at which point the cost kind of goes back down to a little bit more reasonable number, and I think that helps keep it within the Guardian card pool a bit more, right? People aren't going to play the Runic Axe if they can't upgrade it. So I kind of like that from a designs point a little bit more than multi-class, which sometimes felt like it was faction breaking a little bit too much. Anyway, that's a lot of words for the simplest upgrade on this list, so let's keep going. Next up, we have the Inscription of Glory, which adds a new inscription. So in addition to accuracy or power, you can now also spend a charge to get Glory. If this attack defeats an enemy, choose 1. Draw a card, heal 1 damage, or heal 1 horror. Now, this is a pretty potent effect. Again, I talked about card draw just now. Also, healing damage and horror is not insignificant. But the thing that you have to remember is it costs a charge to activate this ability, and it has to be before you perform the attack itself. So if you fail the attack, you're not getting this ability, which creates an interesting balancing point. You only start out with 4 charges, unless you're Akachi, in which case you can start out with 5, but you only replenish once a round. So if you're getting kind of swamped with enemies, are you going to be getting your Glory inscription, or are you just going to saving those charges to deal more damage and get more of a combat boost? I think this is an interesting way to balance this card because, for example, the level 3 Guardian Enchanted Blade gives you 3 attacks that let you draw cards and heal horror if you defeat enemies, but you know you're getting those cards in that horror, and you're kind of getting a more surefire thing. Whereas with the Runic Axe, you're only getting a small effect for each of these charges, but the charges keep replenishing. So as long as you can manage them, it's quite good. But yeah, there's a tension there, which I like. That tension is also present with the Inscription of the Elders, which adds another inscription. Elders, if this attack succeeds by an amount equal to or greater than your location's shroud, discover a clue at your location. This is an interesting design, and not one I would ever have come up with. Guardians getting clues through dealing with enemies is not a new thing. I mean, evidence, but usually that's on defeat, not on succeeding an attack. And the fact that you have to succeed by the amount equal to your shroud is very interesting. This makes the accuracy inscription, which I initially felt was probably going to be the lesser used one, because as a Guardian, you probably have reasonable combat, makes it much more interesting because you need to succeed by 3, 4, maybe 5 in order to get that clue. That being said, testless clues, or maybe not testless clues, that's wrong, but getting clues without having to spend additional cards and resources is quite powerful, so I like that. But again, that charges, are you spending a charge on this? Especially when you need to succeed by a lot, if you don't have a way to commit it, maybe you boost it with skill boosters or cards. It's an interesting design, I like it. Keep an eye on that one. Inscription of the Hunt, I think, is going to be quite underrated. It adds the Hunt inscription, immediately move to a connecting location or engage an enemy at your location. This is bonus actions. This is just free bonus action whenever you do this. No skill test required, no risk of it failing. I think this is like the one that I would always want to see if I'm playing in multiplayer, because the chance that an enemy spawns on my teammate or at a connecting location is pretty big, and I just get to spend one charge to save an entire action. As Spectral Razor showed, the ability to engage enemies off of other investigators or aloof enemies is very powerful, and I think this is a very good ability. Then we have Inscription of Fury, which adds an inscription, Fury. If this attack is successful, in addition to its standard damage, deal 1 damage to each other enemy engaged with you. This is another one of those times where Customizable really shows its strength. Normally, I think Customizable is, I would say that this Fury inscription isn't, that important. Unless you're playing high count multiplayer, there's not usually that many enemies engaged with you. So do you really want this? But if you're playing the Dream Eaters campaign, which has the swarming keyword, suddenly this becomes very useful to deal with a whole bunch of Zoogs or whatever at once. And so this lets them just add an additional ability on a card without having to completely design a new melee weapon that deals with swarming enemies. They just add one little ability on the upgrade sheet, and you can take it if you're in the Dreamlands, and if you're not, fine, you just leave it. I do think that that's kind of where I'm at with this card. If I'm not expecting swarming or lots of enemies, probably just leave this one at home. But it's not a bad ability, and there is actually a combo with it we're going to get to in a second. Because next up we have the Ancient Power upgrade, which costs 3 XP, and you may imbue the same inscription up to 3 times. Now, if we want to talk about spending our charges, this is a way to burn through charges very quickly, but get potentially crazy amounts of value. So, Power, this attack deals 4 damage if you use the same inscription 3 times. Glory, if this attack defeats an enemy, draw 3 cards. That sounds really good. Inscription of the Hunt might sound kind of innocuous, but until you realize that you can just move across the entire map, most maps, just at once. And that Inscription of Fury I was just talking about, it's cute when it's 1 damage, but when it's 3 damage to every other enemy, it's actually becoming more powerful than the main attack. So you can potentially attack 1 enemy engaged with you and deal 3 damage to a different enemy engaged with you. Ancient Power is very powerful, but of course you're going to have to manage those charges carefully. Fortunately, there are a few more upgrades that can help with that. So we have the Saga and Script Weaver upgrades. Saga costs 3 XP and replenishes 2 charges at the start of each round instead of 1. And the Script Weaver upgrade is 4 XP, but for every charge you spend, you may imbue the axe with up to 2 different inscriptions. And I think this brings the Runic Axe up to an endgame level of power, where you're able to use multiple charges every round, or potentially, and you are able to use multiple inscriptions with a single charge. This is where we have this customizable being a single weapon that you can take throughout the entire campaign. When you have something like the Holy Spear, usually you will start the campaign with a different weapon and then upgrade into the Holy Spear. With the Runic Axe, you start out simple and then upgrade into the various abilities that you want, eventually ending up with a much more powerful weapon than you started out with, but without ever having to swap out weapons and having to reconfigure potentially parts of your decks to work with this card. I think both these upgrades are potentially very powerful. I think Saga is just kind of the simple but elegant way. As long as you can reliably use a couple of charges every round, you will get a steady refill. And Script Weaver is good if you've grabbed several other inscriptions so that you can do multiple charges into a massive, powerful attacks that also give you various other benefits. Really like this design. Very unique design. A lot of text on this one. It's gonna cause memory issues. Make sure you have a clear way of denoting which upgrades you have so you can keep track of it during the game. Up next, we have the Summon Servitor. Now, both the Summon Servitor and the Power Word card I already mentioned in my Amina video, so I'll be going through them a little bit faster just because I've already talked about them a little bit. But as a reminder, the Summon Servitor is a 2-cost Mystic asset with the customizable keyword. It has a willpower icon, it's a summon, takes up the ally and arcane slot, and has, as an additional cost to play it, you must discard another asset you control. Now, as a reminder, as I mentioned in the Amina video, if you have assets with Doom on it, this can actually be an upside. And then it says, Summon Servitor enters play at your location. So this asset actually comes into play at your location, and then takes one of its actions during each of your turns, which can only be used to take the following action: move Summon Servitor to a connecting revealed location. Summon Servitor is also unique, so you can only have one of them in play at once, which is probably for the best. So we have on our upgrade sheet 3 upgrades that each cost 1 XP that give it a new ability or new action ability that let it fight, evade, or investigate. All of them test a base skill value of 4, but they also allow you to ignore certain keywords when it comes to fighting or evading. Now, this all reminds me quite a bit of the Summoned Hound. The Summoned Hound is also a ally and arcane slotted card that let you get an extra action essentially by free triggers, get you testing combat or intellect to fight or investigate. Now that one has a slightly different drawback where you have this Unbound Beast in your deck, but the ability for this to give you an extra action to do a skill test with is quite neat. Keep in mind, however, that you have to spend an action as well to move it, or rather you have to spend one of its actions to move it, so it probably won't be testing every single turn. That being said, also keep in mind that any stat boost that you have also apply to the Summon Servitor. So if Agnes straps on a pair of Strack shoes, the Summon Servitor will be evading at 5 instead of 4. I don't quite know how that works, but I'd like to think that Agnes just buys a matching pair of shoes for her little demon buddy. That sounds fun to me. Then we have 2 upgrades that I would categorize as kind of passive upgrades. So we have the Armored Carapace and Wings of Night upgrade. Armored Carapace gives the Summon Servitor a health value of 3, and then it can be assigned damage dealt to any investigator at its location. Wings of Night, after the Summon Servitor moves from your location to a connecting location, you may move to that location as well. Now, I think I mentioned this in the previous Amina video, but basically, if you're not looking to be doing a bunch of skill testing things with this, then I think these might be the upgrades you go for, because all you do with it is take that move action, making sure it stays close to you so that you can use it for soak, and you can use it for some free moves, kind of like a safeguard. This is a good plan if you're planning to use the ability mostly to discard an asset at command and then have a little bit of additional utility. One thing to note with the Wings of Night upgrade is that the move ability on the Summon Servitor specifies that the Servitor has to be moving to a connecting revealed location, which means you can't really use it to scout ahead. You're always going to be using it to backtrack. Still very useful in a lot of scenarios, so for 1 XP you could do a lot worse. Then finally we have 3 kind of more powerful upgrades. As we've kind of seen with all of these, the upgrades get more powerful as you get to the bottom of the list. They start costing more XP. So the Dominance upgrade lets you pick either to remove the Arcane slot requirement or Ally slot requirement for Summon Servitor. Fantastic if you're planning to keep this thing around a bit more and use it for skill tests. The Dreaming Call, I think I mentioned, changes the requirement for discarding an asset into returning the asset to owner's hand. Again, if you're trying to reset an asset with Doom on it, the ability to get it back to hand instead of discarding it means that it potentially sets up even more powerful things with Amina, where you have a powerful asset that maybe has limited uses, like a Rite of Seeking or Clairvoyance, that you return to hand after using all the charges so that the Doom gets cleared off of it, and then you can play it again and redo everything. A very powerful ability that you're going to have to think about in deck building how to exploit that, because by itself it's not that powerful, but when combined with Investigator abilities or certain cards, it's going to be fantastic. And then finally, Demonic Influence makes the Summon Servitor get 2 different actions instead of 1 during each of your turns. I think this will be a must-take upgrade if your plan is to use this for lots of skill tests, because otherwise you're spending too much time moving this thing all the time. This lets you move and also take a fight or evade or investigate, which seems like just what you want to be doing if this is the card you want to be using for your skill tests. And then finally we have Power Word. This is the last of the customizable cards available at time of recording. I talked about this one in the previous video as well, but to go over it again, it is a 3-cost event in Mystic called Power Word. It is an intellect icon. It is a spell. This is very important for arcane research. And it reads customizable, fast, play only during your turn, attached to a non-elite enemy at your location. And then it has an action. If attached enemy is at your location, you can parlay to give it a command, limit once per round per command. Either go, this enemy moves once in a direction of your choice, or cower, this enemy exhausts. Upgrading the Power Word gives you the option to add a bunch of additional commands. Betray lets you deal damage to any enemy at this enemy's location with a equal or lower fight value. Mercy lets you heal an investigator equal to the damage or horror value of the enemy. Confess lets you discover clues if the health value of the enemy is higher than the location's shroud. And Distract lets you automatically evade an enemy with a equal or lower evade value. One of the things that really stands out to me here is that you want to be grabbing big, nasty enemies with this Power Word. That's depending on exactly which ability you want, what is important. If you want to deal damage with the Betray, you're going to need somebody with a big fight value. Whereas if you're going for that Confess, the most important stat, of course, is the health. Keep this in mind when you're thinking about Power Word, and especially if you know what enemies exist in a campaign, to know which enemies you're planning on Power Wording. That being said, all of these seem very powerful because they are testless effects. As we've seen in the past, the ability to bypass the Chaos Bag entirely is worth quite a bit of resources in order to get testless clues, testless damage, as much healing as you need. And one very interesting little tidbit, now that we know how these cards interact with deck building, is that you're able to purchase the Mercy upgrade for Power Word when adding it to your deck, thereby making it a card that heals horror, which Carolyn Fern cares about because as soon as it heals horror, it is now a card that heals horror, and therefore she can take it up to level 5. So as long as you're willing to spend the 1 XP to give the Mercy command to your Power Words, you can then just add any of the other ones without having to worry because it is now a card you can take up to level 5. It's also worth noting, while I'm talking about Carolyn, that Carolyn can take the Runic Axe level 0, but as soon as you add even a single box, it is no longer allowed for her because it becomes a weapon card level 1 to 5, which she cannot take. So that's a bit silly, but it's kind of funny. Moving back over to Power Word, we have 2 additional kind of minor or utility upgrades. Greater Control returns the Power Word to your hand as a free triggered ability. Quite useful if you're worried about your enemies that you've Power Worded getting killed. Perhaps there's a scenario effect that kills them, or maybe one of your teammates is just like, time to kill these things. Getting them back to hand so you can reuse them. It seems expensive. Again, this thing costs 3 to play. But on the other hand, if you have the economy for it, it's better to get them back to hand than have them discard. And the other one is Bonded. You may, for 3 XP, you may activate the Parlay ability on Power Word from up to 1 location away from the attached enemy. This is actually quite important, I think, if you want to be using these a lot, because you're otherwise going to be spending a lot of time evading or exhausting these enemies, rather, with the Cower ability, because otherwise you're going to start getting hit in the enemy phase when you're trying to get away from them. So the ability to stand somewhere nearby and use these keywords seems very good. Especially if you combine the Distract keyword with the Cower keyword and the Bonded ability, which lets you evade multiple enemies at the same location, assuming that the enemy with the Power Word has the higher evade value. You can just lock down multiple enemies at a location you're not at for as many rounds as you're willing to put in the actions, which seems quite powerful actually. And one way to reduce the number of actions you would have to spend on that is with the last 2 upgrades. So the Tongue Twister upgrade, when you use the Parlay ability, you can take 2 different commands. That seems very good. And then the Try Spoken upgrade lets you put 3 copies of Power Word into your deck. When you give a command using one of the copies, you can also give that command to every other enemy with the Power Word attached. That seems fantastic. Now keep in mind, when you buy the Try Spoken upgrade, the 3 XP you're spending on that upgrade already pays for putting the extra copies into your deck. You do not have to also spend XP to put those copies into your deck by the rules that were shared by Maxine. So this seems very good. One of the things that Power Word, I think, the only thing really holding it back, other than the 3 cost, is that it is a very action-expensive way to get a lot of Tesla's effects, because you're having to spend a lot of actions parlaying with this enemy. And Tongue Twister and Try Spoken really cut down on the action cost, so I expect these will be the upgrades people look at almost right away to see, okay, I want this, and then I can put on these additional commands to really abuse having free actions or having this entire squad of multiple enemies that are all power worded. Okay, thank you for watching. That was kind of a long one, and it was kind of a little bit rushed. I hope it was still it made sense, because obviously I didn't want to sit on this one too long with the customizable rules coming out just out of nowhere. I really just wanted to have the chance to explain it and talk about all these new cards, especially since we're getting a lot of new previews very soon. If you want to stay on top of things, join the Discord at discord.gg/missilebusters. Feel free to post things in the comments. And I promise you the next video I make will be on Carson, unless there's something completely crazy that gets previewed, in which case it might still change. No, I'm going to do Carson next. I have like half the script already in mind. I really want to do it. I'm going to need to give my throat a little bit of pause, because this was a very long one. But I had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be seeing you until the end of time.